Hey everyone, welcome to BRAP, an early BRAP at that. We usually go live on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern time, but I'm actually on vacation this week, so I was like, you know what? Let me do an early BRAP so that I can do some gaming later on this evening. And with me, I do have Game Logic. What's going on, Logic?
Nothing much, man. Just here on a Wednesday afternoon with a Mountain Dew, ready to go.
I hear you. I'm actually drinking some coffee right now. A little late afternoon coffee. So also big shout out to everyone in the live chat. Thank you everyone for stopping by, hanging out with us. I know this was really kind of on a short notice. I really didn't advertise this earlier in the day. I was kind of running around today, just busy, and decided to kind of at the 11th hour to do a early BRAP show. I'm not sure if the rest of the BRAP panel members will be joining, but they may be jumping in at some point during the show. So, but do me a favor, everyone in the live chat. I'm going to drop a link here. If you could do me a favor, just retweet the link, let everyone know that we are live. And so I do have a couple things to discuss on today's BRAP. We're talking about consolidation in gaming. Should we be worried? That has been a topic, Game Logic, that's been happening a lot on the Twitters. I've heard this conversation come up in on podcasts, and I've seen a little bit of the back and forth you've had with some of the gamers on Twitter gaming. Some of the commentary there has been baffling. Yeah. And then we're going to talk about a popular game arriving to Game Pass. And there's some Tencent news out there. Tencent is making more investments, so we'll talk about that a little bit. Have some Bethesda news as well we'll discuss. So, Logic, I know we spoke earlier in the day, and I tweeted this out. I was finally able to roll the credits for Final Fantasy 16. I didn't play do a lot of the side missions. I just didn't feel like doing it. I did a few of the side missions, but not really something that I care to do. I found the story to be very compelling. It's funny because when the game came out, or when the demo first came out, I remember being very excited, and I remember thinking, "Wow, like this demo is amazing. This is like Game of Thrones for Final Fantasy." And I really enjoyed with the demo just how compelling the story was.
And then what did I warn you about?
You kind of warned me about taking that small vertical slice of the game and assuming that the entire game would be like that. That would be like this, because when you play the demo, there's a lot of plot twists. I mean, the demo just hits you like right in the face. It punches you right in the gut, in a good way. And so that kind of set the expectation. The rest of the game would be like that. Yeah, go ahead.
And not really a warning to you, because you're a Final Fantasy fan.
Yes.
So you were there, right? You were going to be seated. I don't want to say you were going to be seated regardless, but you were looking forward to the game, and the demo helped reinforce that. But for people who aren't Final Fantasy fans or aren't as familiar with the content, because we have new gamers coming into the market every day, right? They may have seen that vertical slice and the question, and not just the question for Final Fantasy, but you and I talked about a number of games that have done this either through demo or marketing, right? Monster Hunter World, Diablo 4, right, in presenting its impression to console players. What was the other big one? Elden Ring, right? For people who aren't Souls fans, right? People being presented these things in not necessarily deliberately in a way, but maybe making some assumptions about them or thinking that they're going to be a thing that they may not necessarily be, that people who are familiar with the content and familiar with the franchises were better prepared to accept.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I mean, I think if somebody was new coming into Final Fantasy, I think there's going to be certain aspects about this game. If they weren't drawn to Final Fantasy before Final Fantasy 16, I think there's some people out there that would have played the demo and maybe thought it was and thought that this was a representation of the game, the entire game. And it is to an extent. Like, there's certainly a lot of elements, there's a compelling story, there's plot twists. Those things in the demo are in the game, but it very much is a Final Fantasy game where you're walking around towns, you're engaging with NPCs, you are doing side quests. Of course, there's every Final Fantasy, there's chocobos and lots of chocobos, and you earn your trusty chocobo that you can use to traverse. So. And the combat, I think for some of the hardcore Final Fantasy fans out there, I think that was kind of a point of contention for some of them, because it wasn't that turn-based or that action turn-based type, fighting system. It was very much a button masher, Devil May Cry, and shouldn't be surprised that it feels like Devil May Cry, because one of the developers on Devil May Cry 5 has actually developed the combat system for this game, and so it's very much it's definitely I think a departure from previous Final Fantasy games. The combat system is, but this game very much draws inspiration from a Game of Thrones. As I said to you earlier, Logic, while the story's compelling, there are a lot of moving pieces. You kind of have to pay attention. The dialogue's written in a way that maybe some people, and I don't mean this to, I'm not saying this to throw shade at anyone, but there's the way the dialogue's written. I mean, some people may have difficulty understanding kind of what's being communicated. But the game does a good job. Like you mentioned, Logic, you talked about the Game of Thrones, the books at least. The Final Fantasy 16 actually does give you a character tree where you can actually learn about the characters, kind of get up to speed with their background, their history. There's also updates to the realm. You can actually see someone that will give you an update on what's going on and give you some history. So the game does a good job at managing some of the complexities of the story and how nuanced a story can be and how quickly it can change through these character trees and kind of a retelling of what's happening in the game. Now, in terms of Game of the Year, Logic, I don't know, man. I think it's a really good game, but I'm not so sure if I could say it's up there with what I've played so far with Tears of the Kingdom. One of the complaints I have with Final Fantasy 16 is that the game does take the controller away from you. There's times where I am in these icon battles, which are like, imagine this game also feels like Michael Bay came in and kind of landed a hand on these big action set pieces with the icon battles, and they look gorgeous, by the way. I mean, they are incredible looking, and there's a lot of stuff going on screen, a lot of particle effects. Sometimes it's a little bit too busy. Sometimes the effects and what's going on the screen is a little bit too busy, where I kind of was like, okay, well, where's my character? I don't see what's going on. And, it often made it hard at times for me to parry correctly or parry at the right time. But the combat's fun. When you start unlocking some of the other icon abilities, the combat is fun. It does add some variety to the combat because you do have other skill sets you can use, other icon abilities that you can use that you can invest in as well to string along different combos. But I'm not sure, Logic, where I think this is a good game. I'm just not so sure this is a Game of the Year contender for me. So that's where I'm right now. I could change my mind as I just finished the game today, so I could change my mind at some point. After kind of digesting what I played a little bit more. The music is great. It's actually, I would say the music's probably one of the better Final Fantasy soundtracks I've heard in some time. I definitely like this. I definitely like Final Fantasy 16. Definitely like it better than the Final Fantasy 15. I think I can't say anymore. There's other things I want to say, but I don't want to say anything else without spoiling the game. So I'll just leave it at that. So those are just my quick initial reaction, my quick thoughts after completing the game today. So, so we'll see. But yeah, Logic, again, I don't know if it's Game of the Year contention for me. I think it's Tears of the Kingdom right now is the game that I can say with confidence would be a Game of the Year contender for me.
Have you said Game of the Year 3 times in the past 2 minutes because you're attempting to go to comment at me?
Yeah, it's not working. Because I was waiting for you to at some point just jump in and say, you know what, it's too early. The year's not over. We can't.
Yes, so that's my contention. I find no point in having the Game of the Year discussion until December, until you know that the last major game of the year has shipped in December, and my threshold for major game goes a bit far down. So, but here's my other reason why I say that. It's not simply the date cutoff. It's also the fact that in my personal philosophy and belief is that, and about many things in life, not just games, but especially games, artistic endeavors, is I don't know that you really know how you feel about a game until you've had a chance to sit with it for a while. So you just finished the game today. I would contend that you need to sit with it for a while. And that sitting with it includes being exposed to other games that may make you think differently about the game you just finished.
Point. Yeah.
And that's why I say, when I sit down to do, and on E2KG, we don't do Game of the Year. We do a thing called Gaming Superlatives, because in addition to just, we're not journalists. We don't play. I mean, I think I've gone through this on the show before. There are something like close to 300 games each year that are released that wind up charting an 80 or above on Metacritic. There's nowhere near that I even necessarily play 10% of those games, or that the cast plays a significant chunk of those games. So I just don't feel like we're, in the weeds enough to really make a declarative statement on Game of the Year. So we do Gaming Superlatives, which, there are several categories, that we kind of put through artistic consideration for games design. It's certain other factors in the industry. And when I do that, when we all go to do that, I have to lay down everything that I've played in the year, right? I have to put all the puzzle pieces out on the floor and weigh and consider them all in aggregate. Like, it just doesn't do me any good to think about them kind of onesie twosie, because it's a holistic consideration, not a singular one. But that's just me and my approach to it.
Yeah. Wild Wolf says Final Fantasy 16 is as much of a Final Fantasy game as Tears of the Kingdom is a Zelda game. I don't agree that Final Fantasy 16 is not a Final Fantasy game. I mean, sure, the combat is been turned upside down. I could see that argument. You could say, well, it doesn't have that turn-based, element to it. And that's fair, because it doesn't. But it does very much have a lot of Final Fantasy DNA in it. The character models, the music, the icons, magic, even some of the side quests and in engaging with NPCs and the dialogue. It very much it feels like a Final Fantasy game. Outside, I would say, of the combat, but even the combat, comparing it to Final Fantasy 15, that was probably more true to a Final Fantasy game in terms of combat. Some of the character movement in combat is similar to 15, but it's also injected with lots of steroids, is how I would describe it. So I just don't agree with that, because I've seen that narrative that it's not a Final Fantasy game. I don't agree with that. I actually do applaud them for taking the combat in a different direction, taking that chance. It works. I would say it probably does a little bit too much of hand-holding. There's certain things that are preloaded on your character that you should disable, like the ability to automatically, parry or use an icon ability by hitting one button, or the ability to automatically replenish your health. I mean, those things I would encourage, if you're looking for a little bit more of a challenge, you should turn those things off and manage those abilities and manage your inventory yourself in combat. That will make it a little more challenging. But even then, the game's not really challenging. Now, New Game Plus, when you beat the game, is apparently, and again, I haven't played New Game Plus, but they advertise it as such that if you're looking, it's for people or for Final Fantasy gamers who are looking for more of a challenge. So I'll have to test that out and see if it's much more of a challenge. But the game definitely does hold your hand quite a bit. But there's ways to kind of disable some of those features and make it a little more challenging. But there are times in the gameplay, even though you're hitting one button or you're managing or cycling through your icons, your icon abilities, being able to parry, dodge, time all those movements, those feel rewarding. But it's not, if you're looking for a turn-based RPG and that's kind of what your preference is, this may not be the game for you either. But I think if you're open to trying something new, this could be a game worth picking up because it does. And the one thing it does very well, again, the compelling story. It does have a really strong, compelling story. Now, there's lulls in that story at times where I'm like, oh my God, can we just move on already? And I find myself at times like, where I was like, I want this to end now. So, but you know what, Logic, I don't disagree with you. That's a great point that I probably also need to let this marinate just a bit longer.
Yep.
All right. So, Logic, GTA 5 is arriving to Game Pass. So I think that's a big, pretty big get, I think, for X. Well, GTA 5 was actually on the PlayStation Plus subscription service as well, I think, prior to coming to Xbox, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you might be right. In fact, I think maybe that's how I haven't spent that much time with it. I'm just not a big GTA player, but I think you're right.
I think so.
No, I'm not sure. I may have actually bought that on PS5. I'd have to check.
Yeah. So Microsoft announced Xbox Game Pass for July. You get Grand Theft Auto 5, which will be cloud-enabled, console-enabled, obviously, but cloud-enabled. I actually might give it a shot on cloud. Interesting. Speaking of cloud, I'm actually watching my my 9-year-old play Spider-Man Miles Morales via cloud right now. Now, I can tell that the game doesn't have all the visual bells and whistles, but it seems to be playing well. I don't see any hiccups or anything like that. But the visually speaking though, I could tell the difference though. But anyhow, so Grand Theft Auto 5 is coming out to Game Pass. I would imagine that's and it's interesting because Strauss Zelnick talked about his thoughts on releasing games day and date. Doesn't feel like it makes sense for their games. That maybe could make sense down the road, at a later date, where you could release a game in a subscription service like that. So Grand Theft Auto 5, The Cave, some of these games I've never heard of, to be honest with you. The Cave, Common Hood, Insurgency, which is coming on PC only. Exo Primal is another one.
Yeah, that one's actually, I wouldn't call it necessarily a big get, but it's I don't know. I think it's probably a relatively soft month, and that game is probably one of the larger ones coming out this month, so that's not insignificant coming to Game Pass.
Yeah, I can't pronounce this. Technotica? There we go. That's coming out. And by the way, these games, a lot of these games that are coming out in July, as we know, that staggered releases. So today's Grand Theft Auto 5, Sword and Fairy, Together Forever is also releasing today on Game Pass. That's going to be available on cloud, console, and PC. And then tomorrow, Big Pixel 3. July 11th, Common Hood, Insurgency Sandstorm is July 11th. And then the week of July 13th, we have Exo Primal, Technotica, and The Cave. Why can't I pronounce that, by the way? That's what I get for being bilingual. Anything on that list of interest to you, Hamp?
No. I think the big the big story in here, the thread is, kind of the optics on the business move of putting GTA 5 in the service. As far as I know, and double checking, I think on PlayStation 5 that GTA 5 is. I don't know. I don't think that it's in PlayStation Plus Premium. I think you need PlayStation Plus, not Premium. I think you need PlayStation Plus in order to play GTA 5 online. I think is where some of those news stories are. But on Game Pass, as far as I can tell, it is the full game. So if for some reason you haven't played the campaign, you can do that. It's an interesting thing because, when you include the GTA Online component, it is essentially a games as a service game. The move of putting a game like that in Game Pass for a limited amount of time and then pulling it out is one of the dynamics that drives people to buy games, even though they're available in Game Pass, right? Because people start something that looks like it's going to be a career or something that they're going to invest a lot of time in, and then they want to retain that title even when it's going to leave Game Pass. So it also makes it kind of curious why, if Activision wanted to drive sales of Call of Duty, why they wouldn't make a deal to put Call of Duty in Game Pass for, a few weeks or a season or something like that, and then hope that when they pulled it, right, that would encourage people to do more sales. But I think part of the thing that's curious about it too is just in the social media space that, people take the GTA 5 example, which is an example where additional game sales are driven for customers that might otherwise not have bought it, and kind of seize on that anecdote as an overall indicator of the Game Pass dynamic. And I think whether or not that's true, despite the marketing rhetoric that, Game Pass drives game sales, which I'm sure that it does to a certain extent, the problem is just as we get further and further down the field and Microsoft doesn't report Game Pass subscription numbers and things of that nature, it gets murkier and murkier just how much of that knock-on effect there is really going on.
Yeah, well, I think you're releasing that game. I mean, this game's 10 years old now, but I think this kind of speaks to what Strauss Zelnick has been talking about. Like, it doesn't make sense for them to release a game day and date in a subscription service like that. But it may make sense for them down the road, maybe to pull additional users into that live service game. But what's interesting too is one of the narratives that I've seen come up as a result of this announcement is that people are saying that look, publishers don't hate Game Pass, and they're kind of taking out of context what Jim Ryan and Bobby Kotick said about subscription services, and it kind of leads to my frustration about the conversation around video games. And we're going to talk about this more in a little bit, but where people aren't paying attention to what these executives are saying. They're not really following the news. They're getting their news from Twitter gaming and whatever console centric podcast that they listen to on a regular basis. And that's not at all what they said. What they were speaking out against was releasing games day and date in a multi-game subscription service. And for them, it just doesn't make sense. For other publishers, it may make sense. I saw people saying, oh, well, so-and-so indie publisher thinks Game Pass is great. Well, yeah, I mean, they may think it's great for their games, but there's certain publishers that have different business models where that may not make sense. But that's one of the things, unfortunately, that I saw being discussed today. Logic is that Jim Ryan was lying and Bobby Kotick was lying. So, because GTA 5 is going to Game Pass.
Oh, was that the comment? Is that where the comment that somebody was lying came from?
Yeah.
So here's the problem I have, and it to me it doesn't matter, right, which executive you're throwing it at. What I just don't understand, and this goes back to a lot of the discussions we've been having about credibility and bias and one-sidedness, and I get it. Like if you're a fan of a console and you serve a community, that's fine. But then please don't expect me to consider you credible when everything that comes out of your mouth is always predetermined to be one-sided for one console or another. What I don't understand is for somebody who leverages that accusation, why is it every single time Jim Ryan says something, he's lying, but every single time Phil Spencer says something and then Xbox fails to deliver, doesn't meet up to expectations, as in, Greenberg's comment about what the showcase was going to be, all these sorts of things, then that's not them lying. That's just, or, Redfall being Bethesda's fault and not Microsoft's fault, right? That's not them lying. That's just, these are, I just have 99 excuses for why that happened. But when Jim Ryan, the hypocrisy and the unevenness, it's just worthless as part of the discussion, as far as I'm concerned. People running around throwing around those sensationalist accusations are just, like I always say, right? They're just part of trying to be the Jerry Springer, Maury Povich, Geraldo Rivera dynamic, right, in the gaming discussion.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Lord Dorinza says GTA 5 has already been in Game Pass. So it shows you how much I pay attention to Game Pass.
Well, it has been, and I thought I said that it's been in there before, and it's been in there before, and then they've pulled it. And what they found is that drives sales, right? When you have a game like that is a game as a service, essentially, right? And then because people have invested time in it, and maybe have gotten into GTA Online and have content in it, they want to keep playing it. So yeah, I mean, and that's why I said, I don't then know why Activision wouldn't consider doing the same thing, right? Not necessarily putting it in their day and date, but say in season 3, putting a Call of Duty in Game Pass, leaving it in there for the season, and then pulling it, right, in the hopes that will encourage some additional people, for sales, and then you may get some microtransaction revenue, over that time period as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. I do want to move on to another news item here. Logic, what's interesting? And this is probably just because of COVID, but Gamescom 2023 is next month, and I really haven't given much thought to Gamescom at all. So Xbox, and this is, and so we know about the launch of Starfield, September. What is it? September 6th? Is that the release date? I forget now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So ahead of the release of Starfield, Xbox and Bethesda will both be on the show floor at Gamescom 2023. Gamescom is held in Germany, for those who don't know. And Sony will not be there. Sony is skipping Gamescom 2023 altogether. If you believe the rumors, apparently there's another show, PlayStation show coming up in September, but we'll see. Again, those are rumors. I'm just hoping, for me personally, like I don't, and I've never really followed Gamescom much. There have been some big announcements there. Microsoft did announce, if you remember, what was it, 10 years ago when they landed the time exclusivity for Tomb Raider. I believe that was, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was announced at Gamescom. But anyhow, now we don't know much about what Xbox Bethesda is going to be showing off at Gamescom, but I will say this, Logic, if they show off more Starfield, I will be okay with that. I'd like to see more Starfield prior to release. I would imagine they would probably show more Starfield as the game releases the following month, but that's what I'm hoping to see from that particular show. Anything that you might be looking forward to seeing from the Xbox Bethesda showcase or show at Gamescom?
No, to me, the waters are way too murky, to make predictions on that. The things I want to bring up is, we, and I have this problem too, I think, and I think part of what we always want to get back to with this show, right, is getting information out there that, lots of other gamers who don't have time to keep up with all this stuff, maybe haven't latched on to or understood. So I always go into this bathtub after E3, right, of where, like you said, I kind of forget that there are other game shows coming down the pike. And what we do in America in particular is we put our Western world goggles on and we forget that a lot of these game shows are bigger than our own E3, right? So we just had Summer Game Fest this month there, and then later this year, so sometimes things show up at San Diego Comic-Con, which will be in about 2 weeks. So there might be like some Spider-Man stuff there, for instance. But QuakeCon is next month in August 10 through 13. And then Gamescom is in Cologne, and Gamescom has actually, for many years, it has been bigger than E3 was when E3 was, in physical format. So that is a big game show, and it used to be that a lot of the game publication websites and stuff used to pony up big teams to go over there and cover everything because it is kind of like one of the big shows of Europe. You have PAX later on this year, but another non-Western show. Then you have TGS right in September, which also tends to be a very big show, and which is where a lot of the companies try and kind of put their best foot forward for the Japanese market. And then you have some other PAXs, South by Southwest. I think those are the big ones. And then rounding out the year with the TGAs. And then I think and then you have the DICE Awards early next year. And then I think I always miss the GDC date, but I think GDC is
in February.
Yeah. Yeah, this article doesn't have it, but I think it's earlier in the year. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. Like Gamescom, like even in E3, the heyday of E3, Gamescom was always the bigger show.
It was. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it was huge. I mean, I remember, and the thing about Gamescom is they would allow not just media, but also fans to come in, which is one of the reasons why it was so big.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but I feel like more recently there just haven't been any big announcements coming out of Gamescom from what I remember, like in just following Gamescom when I did, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And maybe that's why I just stopped keeping up with it. I also don't really follow TGS that much either anymore. But yeah, no, that's something that just kind of fell off my radar. Like I'm just, and I don't know if that's something I'll keep. I mean, if Starfield comes up, which I would imagine they're going to show more Starfield at, given that it releases the following month at Gamescom. But we'll see.
Well, you would think so. I mean, it's stated that it's Xbox and Bethesda being there. So for an instance, Gamescom last year, it was Dead Island 2 got a new trailer, but that's when also it got the definitive release date. So that's when we found that out for sure. Sonic Frontiers got a new trailer and expanded the information on kind of what the game was going to be out, and got confirmation of its release date there. Gotham Knights had its release date update. So I think a lot of times what happens is that we get news that was actually presented at Gamescom, but it's like reported separately, not as part of a big Gamescom news feed. So we got the news of the delay and the release date last year for Gotham Knights, but I don't think all of us connected it as coming out of Gamescom. Hogwarts Legacy put out additional content there, Callisto Protocol. So there's a lot of amplified content and better trailers that come out, which again, I think get presented as, oh, there's a new trailer for blah, blah, blah game out that everybody was excited about or interested about or tracking for grief. Actually, the DualSense Edge was revealed last year at Gamescom.
That's right. It was. Yeah, that was one of the bigger announcements from PlayStation.
Yeah. Yep.
So much for that battery life, huh?
Yeah, it's weird. The battery life was so poor that it wound up being the best-selling gaming peripheral in the month of May.
Imagine that.
Just so crazy. Yeah.
Imagine that. I tell you, man. Hey, I'm not going to get into that conversation, but yeah. So. Yeah, no, but Logic. So I guess, I mean, maybe we shouldn't be surprised to hear some bigger announcements come out, given some of the announcements you just mentioned with Gamescom last year. We got the new peripheral from PlayStation. We saw new trailers. Did you say there was a game announcement last year? Or?
There are a few.
Okay.
There are a few. I think they're kind of smaller ones. Dune Awakening, the new open world survival MMO, was announced last year. But there was another. The new Tales from Borderlands was announced last year at Gamescom. So not big splashes, but things that things that there are gamers out there that are definitely interested in them.
Yeah. So what's the date for Gamescom 2023? That is last year was August 23rd. I'm trying to look this up now.
It is August 23rd through the 27th.
Oh, so it's the 23rd again. Okay.
Yeah, I think another reason this gets missed a lot is I don't pay a lot of attention to this demographic, but they're very vocal. Is you have the younger demographic of gamers who college are focused on school or something, or maybe even older parents whose kids are going my mind is not on Gamescom at that point in the year as kids are getting ready to go back to school. So I think a lot of this gets buried in that back to school kind of time frame too.
Yeah, that's probably why I don't pay attention to it either. They also showed the Callisto Protocol they showed a new trailer for Callisto Protocol.
Yeah. So I think this is another thing that I would say, talking about trends versus realities. I think a lot of, like I said, expanded trailers come out in this time frame, and a lot of the rhetoric that goes around about, we haven't seen that much of this game or that game. While, truth of the matter is they've put out expanded trailers at Gamescom or TGS.
Yeah. Liza P was also showed last year too. Yeah. Okay.
So look, the whole point, right, for people who watch the show is, I'm not saying this as a matter of shame. I'm saying this as a matter of arm yourself by getting more information and more news and things that you're hungry for. Make sure you pay attention to other game shows that go on besides just E3, Summer Game Fest, whatever. Make sure you pay attention to more award shows than just the TGAs. Because the TGAs are really just kind of they're kind of the reality TV or sitcom of the award shows, right? The other award shows that go on during the year are in my opinion, better and more kind of artistically significant in terms of what the industry is thinking about the games that come out.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. Yeah, people put so much emphasis on Jeff Keighley's award show, and then they skip over the other award show, like the Dice Awards,
they're completely ignorant of their existence.
Yeah, it's a shame because you put all your eggs in the basket of the Keighley show, and it's like for all the people being upset about Forza Horizon 5 not being a Game of the Year contender, or whatever, which I thought was ridiculous, and all the commentary of Jeff Keighley being biased, which is ridiculous. The fact that Jeff has to go out there and explain how the process works is ridiculous. Like, all that stuff's laid out there on the VGA's website. You can easily just click on it. You can actually see who's on the board of the VGAs. Phil Spencer being one of the members of the board. So I mean, if Phil doesn't have an issue with it, why should you? I guess I don't know. Yeah. I think that's it with, I'm sorry, I was just looking at some of the games that were announced last year. Liza P, which I still didn't play the demo. I didn't get a chance to play. Did you play that demo, Logic? I know you're not really a Souls fan per se, but I'm not sure if that's something you...
No, I did not. Okay. In general, I don't have time for demos.
Oh, that's right. You don't play demos.
Finish your game, test your game, release your game. Earn some good opening week buzz, and I'll play your game.
Yeah.
I don't do software QA for free.
Are you saying that we're just bona fide QA testers? Is that what you're saying, Amp?
I'm saying some people are. I'm saying I don't do that for free. I get paid to QA software.
Oh my goodness, man! All right, all right. I lost my train of thought. All right. Tencent's in the news right now. Tencent is making an investment into former Forza Horizon leads Lighthouse Game Studios. Now, the Lighthouse Game Studios is the studio that was formed by co-founder, Playground Games co-founder Gavin Rayburn. Hope I pronounced that last name correctly. So Tencent, this is according to GameIndustry.biz, Tencent Investments into Lighthouse Games. I'm sorry, hold on a sec here. I'm not reading this correctly. Sorry, Hamp. All right, so I should provide some additional context here. Lighthouse apparently is working on a AAA IP, so Lighthouse has secured. We don't know the amount of investment from Tencent, but Tencent is financing or helping finance its goal to be helping Lighthouse Games financing its goal to become one of the UK's biggest AAA studios. Now, Logic, when I was reading about this, and by the way, I want to quote the CEO, who says the shackles are off. It feels truly liberating. One thing that made me kind of think when I read this article on GameIndustry.biz about Tencent's investment, Tencent's always thrown in the conversation of, when we talk about consolidation in the gaming industry, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. People are like, oh, what about Tencent? Or they're trying to. They're like a monopoly. I've actually read someone actually say that Tencent was a monopoly. But Tencent is investing and has invested in other game studios. And it's when people, it's funny, like this conversation comes up when, and I think this is kind of a conversation you were having when we talk about consolidation, which we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I was thinking about, we have this new studio, and everyone says, "Oh, well, if there is mass consolidation in the gaming industry, you have all these other studios opening up." And when Lighthouse was announced, and I get people are excited given the pedigree of Lighthouse Games, presumably but some former Playground Games developers, co-founder starting the studio, and I can understand people being excited about this new studio, the perspective of a new AAA IP. Even given that pedigree, though, this isn't a fill in the gap for consolidation of other developers or publishers, right? And that kind of, when I read this news story, it made me think about that. Like, this isn't an automatic that Lighthouse is going to be successful. Now, I'm sure for Lighthouse, it's encouraging that they have some kind of investment by Tencent that will help them finance their ambitions as a AAA studio. But I guess my point is, it isn't a given that the studio is going to work out or that they're going to put out a AAA game that's successful and that resonates with the market. Thoughts on the investment here into Lighthouse by Tencent Logic?
I think, for the studio, I think it's good. One of the things I was talking about on Twitter earlier today is, the negative side of it is just like you said, right? People say, well, developers leave these big publishers and then they go off and they start a new studio, and that's a new AAA studio right there. And I'm like, let's pump the brakes on that. A developer leaving a AAA studio does not automatically create another AAA studio. A AAA studio isn't defined by a membership of 1, right, or even 10. It's they start the studio, they recruit the additional talent required to ship the game, they get the investment dollars and financial backing that they need, and potentially, engage, in some type of contract work, to get that game published by a big publisher. So it's not 1 for 1. I've talked about on this show too, the criteria of how would that statement be valid in terms of impact. And I've talked about how, Jade Raymond, great creator, mother of Assassin's Creed, but she hasn't shipped a game as anything but executive producer since she left Ubisoft. One of the few real kind of impactful success stories I can think about is Zampella, and I forget the other guy's name because he's since left the company, who left Infinity Ward and then went off and started Respawn Entertainment, and they were successful. However, they were also turned around and then reacquired by Electronic Arts. So this notion that the leakage from the bigs results in additional propagation of developers, in my opinion, isn't true. Those guys go off and they set up new development studios. They, you would need to count up for me, and I've done some of this research, so it just doesn't add up already from my preliminary findings, but they often don't ship the one game that they left that they said they were working on. When they do ship that game often does not break even, much less is profitable. It is then very rare that they go on to produce a second game, meaning that they remain a going concern on the industry. And if their first game is successful and profitable, they are most often then acquired yet again by another one of the big publishers. So this notion that there's some recycling and transition from the bigs, who earn somewhere between 65 and 88% of the revenue in the gaming market on console and PC, leaks out into some type of independent developer world just isn't true as far as it having any significant impact in the way revenue is distributed around the market, which are the types of factors that are looked at when we're considering antitrust and anti-competition. So, but for the studio itself, I think it's good. I think anytime, any of those studios can go off and they get the investment from Microsoft or Sony or Tencent or Epic Games or whatever, and it allows them to do something that has the potential to have some impact, then that's good. I just think that the data analytics behind how impactful that really is does not lead to the conclusions that a lot of people so many times are making.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I mean, who was it? You remember there was much to do about the game Ukulele, which I believe was being developed by former Rare developers, and that game released, and it didn't really do anything. It didn't do anything. Like I don't think it sold well. Yeah, sure. There was a lot of diehard Rare fans that were like, let me just double check here, because I do believe it was former Rare developers that made Ukulele, because it was apparently inspired by Banjo-Kazooie. Let me just double check here. I'm gonna fact check myself here, Hamp. All right, so Ukulele, that was what? Released and published by Team 17, released in 2017 for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch. They later released to Amazon Luna. Let me see here. Looks like former Rare. Yeah, there were some former Rare developers who worked on this game. Yep. Okay. So here we go. So September 2012. This is kind of I think this is kind of what we're discussing here. We talk about the pedigree of, outside of Sampella and company. We talk about like some of these developers leaving studios. Like, again, I can understand the excitement given the pedigree with Lighthouse Studios. But so with Ukulele, September 2012, a group of former Rare employees attempted to create, this is according to Wikipedia, attempted to create a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. They joined under the Twitter handle Mingy Django, the name of a boss from the second Banjo game, Banjo-Tooie. So again, they created the spiritual successor. I remember there's a lot of buzz around this game because it was former Rare developers who had made Banjo-Kazooie's quote unquote spiritual successor to the game, but the game didn't really do well. And actually there were some, the reviews pointed out technical shortcomings, outdated gameplay with the game, and it didn't really have that kind of commercial success of Banjo-Kazooie. So,
yeah, and Callisto Protocol, right, hasn't done big numbers, and we're waiting to find out, right, if that game actually broke even or made a profit. So, it's like I don't want to. Cliff Bleszinski, leaves Epic Games, the whole Microsoft conglomerate, goes off and does Lawbreakers, right? Lawbreakers, winds up not doing well. Like, so my point is not necessarily to say, let me go cherry pick the bombs. My point of the lining that I'm looking for, which no one can provide, because no one has done the research, but yet the people who haven't done the research make the assertion without having done the homework to back it up. Like a person I asked on Twitter today, look, what I'm looking for is somebody to give me a list of 10 studios, right? 10 companies make 65% or more than the revenue in the gaming industry on PC and console. Microsoft and Sony actually make very close to 50% of that revenue. When you combine Activision with them, they will be at 50% or greater. Will be in the hands of 2 companies. So my point is right on this topic, I'm looking for a list of 10 companies that have shipped at least 1 game, preferably 2, that have broken even, at least, preferably been profitable, and that have not been subsequently reacquired by one of those 10 companies that make 65% of the revenue. And I understand that that's a stringent set of criteria, but my point is, unless there are, to me, in my mind, unless there is the data-oriented impact of at least 10 companies achieving that, which to me is the breakout threshold, then those people leaving AAA studios, they're not breaking out, right? And so there's not this recycling impact that is the breakwater against consolidation. And that's my point. And the reason why I think there is a valid concern to be monitoring that, policing that, keeping an eye on it, and a valid concern why, right, this deal continues to get scrutinized.
Yeah, I mean, those smaller studios that, again, I give the example of Ukulele, and you just mentioned Callisto Protocol. Those studios, the publishers, they don't automatically just fill that vacuum. I mean, it just doesn't.
Right, exactly.
It just doesn't happen. All right, Ham. So since we're talking about consolidation now, it's a good segue, by the way. I've seen a lot of conversation around consolidation and people kind of just, as you like to say, kind of hand waving the potential impact of consolidation in the gaming industry. And I think one of the reasons why this deal is being scrutinized the way it is by regulators is for the reasons you just mentioned. One, with you have two top 10 publishers in gaming, and actually, if I remember correctly, I think per the hearings, the injunction hearings, Activision Blizzard King was number 4 in revenue for publishers in the gaming industry. So you're talking about, let's say, for argument's sake, combining 2 top 7 publishers in the gaming industry in terms of revenue dollars, and when you also include Microsoft's ability to leverage its adjacencies, which we've talked a lot about on this show, which I don't think we need to go through again. I think those are reasons why this deal is being scrutinized the way it is. It's the biggest deal in gaming history, a $70 billion acquisition. And one of the concerns that I've raised as a consumer is that this potentially opens the bag of further consolidation. So like risk it for the biscuit says, to your question, consolidation is inherently good or bad, nor bad. It's extremely nuanced, a case by case. I don't disagree that mergers, acquisitions are case by case. But this idea ABK will put pressure on Sony, perhaps that's not the pressure we want as consumers, or the pressure on it's not just, and by the way, people are so singular on this merger, this M&A on just Sony. This is actually bigger than Sony if you think about it, logic. Like this can impact other publishers. This could impact consumers. It could be a downstream impact to consumers, potentially maybe in a negative way, which we've kind of talked about what happens when you remove suppliers from the market, right? Less suppliers, less choice. And if you go down the road of the less choice, and you start getting into things like price increases, without competition, you look in a particular market that could be, you could see the quality of products being impacted. But this is like everyone focuses on Sony. Oh, this is going to make Sony more competitive. Well, no, I mean, this could also lead to Sony in a scenario where we start seeing a war on content, even an escalation of exclusivity, where we start seeing Sony being more aggressive, buying studios, buying exclusive content. We could see publishers who, look, some of these publishing, EA is a publicly traded company. Now you have a situation now where a publicly traded company may be tapping or be kicking the tires of acquisition. I mean, think about this for a second, and I know we've talked about this before in the show, but one of the concerns I have about this deal going through is that it sets a precedent that these large mergers, this consolidation of these 2 big publishing arms within the gaming industry can combine together. And what that basically sends, and I think the ripple effect of that is, hey, to an EA, to a Take-Two, that, hey, they may kick the tires and see who could acquire them. Maybe it's Microsoft. Maybe they start kicking the tires at Microsoft. Hey, Microsoft, you just acquired ABK. We're open to having conversations about acquisition because this deal just went through. And that these companies being publicly traded companies, as we've talked about a lot on this show, their respective CEOs have fiduciary responsibilities to do what's right for their shareholders, to make their shareholders money. And how do you do that? One way to do that is through being acquired. You look at what Kotick and the shareholders stem to make from this deal. Kotick himself will make about $400 something million is what I've seen if this deal goes through. And the shareholders stand to make money too. So that is, and I also, given Microsoft's history here, Game Logic, and kind of what came out of, the hearing last week and the previous week, that Microsoft, in fact, did run scenarios where they would remove Call of Duty from PlayStation. Microsoft's ability to leverage its adjacencies and do things that other companies can't. Risky for the. Actually, it does set a precedent. It absolutely. And it's not precedent, by the way. It's precedent. It actually does set a precedent, because if you're allowing acquisitions of that size and scope to go through, then that sets up that gives the green light. And we have other examples of other industries where that consolidation has happened, and it's led to an acceleration of consolidation in the market for other industries, mobile, ISP providers, the entertainment industry, music. I mean, we have other industries that we can look at where we've seen this sort of behavior happen as certain acquisitions have taken place.
I mean, you can go back through the history and look at the merger and acquisition activities of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and see where trends are set. And in fact, people who are arguing your position argue from that exact point that they don't understand why why today's FTC isn't allowing this deal to go through, based on the historic precedent that in the early 2000s, we did let acquisitions like this go through. We let vertical mergers go through. We allowed acquisitions in excess of the $70 billion go through. So, I mean, what should be understood is obviously companies make the decision and the risk assessment on going after these acquisitions in the first place based on trends. The trends are set based on the precedents of what has been decided before. So claiming that they don't set a precedent, I mean, the very definition of precedent is the series of events that occurred before within a specific regime. So, I mean, your statement doesn't even match the grammatical definition of the term.
Yeah, and I'm not. What do you mean bias? Remove my bias. Like, what do you talk? I'm talking about historical precedent. There's no bias in that. I'm just stating that historical precedent has been set in other industries that have led to mass consolidation, and that's a potential concern as a consumer. I mean, I don't know how do you arrive to bias? Why? Because I'm not pom-pomming this acquisition and saying it's great for gamers and it's great for the industry. That's not bias. And this is,
I think go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and this is the issue I have with people who don't understand historically previous M&As in different industries. I mean, like even with this idea of just precedent alone, you could apply precedent to different industries. Let's use sports for example, right? What happens in sports when a baseball player sets the market rate, sets the precedent of? Do you remember the first $100 million deal? Do you remember the first $200 million deal in baseball? I remember when. I mean, does anyone remember those things? Because I do. And when those deals were set, it set a precedent for other players in MLB to ask for either as much or more money, because that precedent had already been set. I mean,
we don't have to go to baseball. We can go to basketball.
Yeah, I mean, what's up, B Money?
We can go to Michael Jordan. Who's
go ahead.
Arguably one of the best basketball players to ever touch a basketball. Only ever made $100 million in all of his NBA contracts. You got guys who have 2-year deals making $100 million. Just a different landscape. It's a different market.
Yeah,
and that precedent was set where somebody who's not even the face of a league is making $100 million in 2 or 3 years. What do you think the top guys in the league are going to make? That's why guys are making $250 million over 4-year deals.
Yeah. I mean, who is it? Atani plays for the Angels. He may be the first player to land a $500 million contract. But he is. when he sets that market rate, that precedent has been established now for other people to go back and say, well, wait a minute. I have similar stats. You know, I have similar. He got 500 million. I should get 500 million.
I mean, the thing. I think I want to just wipe this component of the argument even just entirely off the table. I mean, what we should realize is there's actually a legal definition and application of the use of the term legal precedent. It's actually in the legal glossary, right? So we're sitting here arguing over a thing that is fact in case law. It's not optional. It's not open to opinion.
Yeah, which I don't. This is why I don't understand I don't understand his point of view, or I don't understand why he's calling other people bias for the reasons you just mentioned, Logic. You know, hey B, what do you? So the reason why we're talking about this, B, because there's been a lot of, and I know I know you don't like talking about the deal, but there has been a lot of conversation around consolidation in gaming. Should we be concerned? I've seen a lot of people hand waving consolidation, saying, "Oh, this isn't a big deal," you know. But I think potentially once you open this bag, it may be hard to close that bag, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility where you see EA, other large publishers who could get that bag per se. That they would look to be consolidated or be acquired. What do you think?
If you remember, mm-hmm. maybe 2 years ago, I called this out early. Yeah. I said that this is what was going to happen before this deal had even taken place. Like right when they announced the Bethesda deal, I said, "See, like we're going to head down this road, and eventually we ain't going to like it." That's it. Once they started buying a publisher, even though Bethesda isn't as big as Activision is, or EA or Ubisoft, once that took place, that opened the door for everything else. They spent $7 billion on Bethesda. They went up to $70 billion on the next purchase. This was just something that was going to continue to happen. Once this deal goes through, that just basically allows all the other publishers to kind of seek that same type of deal. Because, like you guys said, the precedent is set. Regardless of if it's Microsoft or Tencent or whoever it is that comes in with the bag, it's gonna be allowed, because one of the biggest publishers that was on the board has now been removed and has been consolidated into one of the biggest companies in the world. So if we're not gonna scrutinize this deal, then we can't scrutinize a deal for a publisher that isn't as valued as high.
Yeah.
So it's going to continue to happen. We're going to see, some major players come in, from China, from Saudi Arabia. Once those guys, because they got money too. It's not just Microsoft.
I mean, the Saudis are making big inroads in gaming. I mean, they're investing a lot of money.
Right. And people aren't paying attention to that.
Yeah.
That they're just like Tencent. They are invested in a lot of the companies that you love right now. And they can go out and buy those companies wholeheartedly. Yeah. And we never know what's going to happen, once that happens. They could change the whole philosophy of those publishers and studios and not release your favorite games anymore.
Yeah.
So I think Risket is maybe confusing legal application of the term precedent with the notion of historical precedent and risk management and decision making. So yes, it's understood a legal case is not solely decided by precedent alone. Actually, it can almost be. There's a difference between binding precedent and persuasive precedent. Most of the time, in the times that we see exposure to it, it's mostly in the terms of persuasive precedent, particularly in something like non-criminal proceedings. The point BRAP was trying to make is that in terms of risk assessment at a corporation before they decide to go down this path, they look at the historical trend that has been set by what the regulatory agencies have approved up until that point. And the point he was trying to make is that once they approve a $70 billion acquisition, then that will feed into the risk management and decision making that corporations make, and you will see less deterrence for corporations to make the decision to go down these similar paths. And as far as we can tell, on the basis that one of them got approved, we would probably expect that the next one would be approved.
Exactly. And that's my point. And, Biscuit says, BRAP, the FTC has set the precedent that they will litigate making acquisition extremely expensive, long, risky process. If you want to talk precedent, let's talk that. I mean, yeah, I don't disagree that that's part of what the FTC is trying to do with these large vertical acquisitions, these M&As, which really haven't been challenged before. And if historically looking, if you look at other vertical mergers acquisitions, especially like in mobile, they really haven't been beneficial to consumers. But even if this deal does go through the FTC, and it could very well happen, for the reasons Game Logic mentioned, yeah, some may be more risk adverse to wanting to move forward with an M&A. Others may not still. Others may say, you know what? There's too much to be gained financially to not go in front of the FTC or the other regulatory agency to try to get this deal through. And potentially the blueprint for that, if this acquisition goes through, Microsoft and ABK could be there for those companies to utilize. Again, precedent. So the point, Risk, is you're making an assessment or an assertion that the discussion is hung on the hat of that one matter. We've talked about several matters here. I've talked about what the revenue distribution is in the market. I've talked about that there isn't this recycling of developers, especially AAA developers, regenerating the footprint that would create an impact or a knock-on effect on that revenue consolidation. We've talked about how much power the companies wield, the standards that they've set, their ability to essentially set prices at $70 for brand new AAA games. There are lots of reasons why there are concerns over consolidation, is the point. Yeah, I'm not generically arguing that that's not a straw man. It's not, no.
And that's great that you're aware of those topics, but the point is, as far as I'm concerned, you haven't put together a string of consciousness that establishes a strong argument against it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about potential fallout if this deal goes through. That's not a straw man argument. We're just saying. Yeah, go ahead. So Stream IQ is asking a few questions he's been asking for a while. So the point is, Stream IQ, there are economic laws that dictate there are some automatic negatives that have to be looked at and would have to be managed, right? Reduction in total number of suppliers in a market creates less choice for consumers, gives them less options, consolidates a greater amount of power in the barter system, in the capital exchange free market. Those are the immediate knock-on effects that aren't arguable and aren't open for opinion. Now, whether or not the impact is significant from them is a thing that needs to be looked at. But I don't know that anybody's made that assessment definitively. So my point is that when we talk about industry consolidation and the concerns are, I go back to, again, the things that I've been saying the whole time. The industry is already significantly consolidated, right? There are a very small number of companies that wield a disproportionate balance of power, earn a disproportionate amount of the revenue, are able to drive the industry in the direction that they collectively, not saying in a matter of colluding, but collectively decide that the industry should go in. That's where consumers put most of their dollars, as it is already. And so as that dynamic increases, right, it puts more and more power in the hands of the suppliers. And I don't necessarily know that that's a good thing, but it's definitely something that should be open for discussion and open for scrutiny, and leads the regulatory agencies, at least in the case of the two that are mulling this acquisition over, right down the path that they have. I don't think it's a slam dunk. I don't think it's an automatic. I don't go along with a lot of the things that say the deal should go through, FTC shouldn't be standing in the way, they're wasting my taxpayer dollars. People making these claims haven't looked at the metrics of what the FTC has litigated, the numbers of cases that they've tried to block, the number of mergers that they have successfully blocked, et cetera. Yeah. Well, I think it's, I guess what's concerning, I think, from my perspective as a consumer, is when you bring up potential negatives And these negatives have been brought up. I mean, like there's been articles about potential negatives of an arms race and exclusivity in gaming. Like I don't see a scenario where that really benefits gamers. Where now you have, Microsoft, you have Sony now you have Sony, trying to acquire. I mean, like one thing that was telling about Matt Booty's email was that he talked about how it's almost impossible to start a video streaming service today. And he talked about that the only real competitor to them in terms of content, what do you call it? The content moat? I forget what he referred it to.
Yeah, the moat.
Yeah, the moat. He talked about PlayStation being the only competitor in terms of content, but then them, Microsoft being, years ahead of them in terms of, the subscription space. But, this could potentially lead to more like PlayStation kind of ratcheting up the third-party exclusivity deals, which people seem to be very against. This could lead to Sony buying more studios. This could lead to this could lead to a situation too where I described earlier, where publishers may say, you know what, in order to compete with this large conglomerate now that ABK and Microsoft have formed in the publishing space, we may need to be acquired, or we may need to double down on third-party exclusivity with another platform. I mean, I just don't.
Yeah. What if all the publishers who aren't in agreement with releasing their games day and date on a subscription are like, okay, well, this is what Microsoft is doing. They've acquired the biggest publisher on the market. Now let's align with Sony. You know what I mean? Let's release all our biggest games, $70 price points. Give them some exclusive titles, and we'll roll with them because they are more in line with our thinking on what the future of gaming looks like. Then what does that mean for the consumer that only plays on Xbox?
Yeah.
So Stream IQ asked,
what if Sony goes to all the Japanese publishers and developers and says, you know what, everybody come over here, chill around our campfire. We're going to ensure that we invest in your companies, invest in your biggest titles, and we're going to make sure that they get the marketing dollars that they need and that they're going to be successful. You don't got to worry about that other platform over there. That's the type of thing that you could see in regards to big deals like this going through. Some of these publishers and developers are going to start to pick sides.
And that's what I'm concerned about, because that picking a size really leads to less choice. Like the one thing that I see people complaining about in terms of third-party exclusivity, that picking of the sides, I mean, that leads to less choice. And I'm not sure that that's something that I want to see as a consumer in video games. But go ahead, Logic. I'm sorry, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Stream IQ says, I can understand, but there's also opportunity for more investment in safety nets for developers, for example. And I don't disagree with you. I think one of the things that is a positive is you take, I always forget his name. What is Tim Schafer's studio's name? The Psychonauts guys?
Double Fine.
Double Fine. So you take an example like Double Fine, right? Going into the lap of Microsoft, getting the financial backing to do the things creatively that they want to do. I think those are good things. I think any of those studios being acquired and getting that job security, right, that ability to be creative, to take risks that they wouldn't normally take, is fine. The only thing that I've brought up is the tipping of the apple cart that could potentially happen by the size and scale of a large acquisition. This is Microsoft acquiring another, 13 development studios, 15 development studios, right, to the tune of $70 billion, taking $7.5 billion of revenue that's in the market and consolidating it with another earner that makes $16.3 billion. Anyone who discusses that matter with a complete disregard for the quantification of the scale and the mathematically defined impact that it has, to me, is somebody who's skating by the notion of impact. And I guess at that point, we're just at an impasse because I can't have a discussion with somebody who chooses to ignore that math.
And that's a thing that I've seen quite a bit as people compare what Tencent is doing, what NetEase is doing, what Sony's doing with third-party exclusivity deals. They're trying to compare, making an apples to apples when it's not. I mean, just the scale. I mean, the price tag alone should be enough for you to realize that the size of this is much different than locking down third-party exclusivity. You know, the fact that, you know, this is a consolidation of what, 2 top 10 publishers in the gaming industry should tell you that this is different from third-party exclusivity or from what Tencent's doing. My favorite comparison is the Embracer Group. What about Embracer Group? Again, I mean, that's not even the same scale as Microsoft acquiring ABK. It's just not. It's not for the reasons you mentioned too, Logic.
Yeah, Embracer Group's market cap is $3.2 billion.
Yeah.
Their entire market cap.
Yeah. And they're having some challenges as we speak.
Yeah, they make about the same amount in revenue, which you know, they're a big player. They're not in the top 10. I think that puts them just outside the top 10. And again, this would have, the scale wouldn't be the same, but it would definitely invoke a conversation of similar topics if Embracer Group was trying to be acquired by, I don't know, Nintendo or EA or Activision. That would invoke a discussion of consolidation and whether or not it was good or not. Scott Free in the chat says people are just worried about Microsoft buying everything, but Google and Amazon are out there too. And I would say, number one, Google and Amazon are definitely in the discussion when you talk about the types of things that they're going after, and they are in that discussion, right? They are being vetted. They are being consistently called up to Capitol Hill. They are, you know, in both the DOJ, FTC, and ATD are consistently looking at cases to bring against them for antitrust and anti-competition. In the gaming space, the difference with Google and Amazon is this list of things that I pulled together with regards to Microsoft. Microsoft today owns 23 game development studios, has desirable and lucrative game IP, has a successful multi-publisher game content subscription service, which also doubles as a vendor-owned storefront, owns the cloud infrastructure hosting environments as well as much of the transport pipeline and critical peering connections required for delivery, and runs a cloud game streaming service. So even amongst Amazon and Google, they're the only ones that possess all 6 of those arrows in the quiver. Right, the other one is one of the highest valued companies in the world, and I think actually they're sitting at number 2. So the problem is in the gaming space, yes, Google and Amazon and all those people are, and this is again one of the concerns, that if you greenlight the Activision acquisition to go through, then as a starting basis of assumption, if Amazon and Google were to pop up to talk about acquiring EA or 2K or Ubisoft, based on the trend that was set, I would start with the assumption that those were going to go through as well. But even at that point, those 2 competitors, those 2 new entrant competitors, maybe arguably, wouldn't have all the tools that Microsoft currently has before acquiring Activision.
Well, they don't. I mean, they don't have the platform in Xbox. They do have the cloud infrastructure, but they don't have the content right now unless they acquire that content. But even then, like, Google doesn't really, I mean, Google's rumored to be trying to implement gaming through YouTube, but Google doesn't have that platform that Microsoft has with the Xbox. Or they don't have the platform of PC per se. They don't have that. Microsoft has that. Microsoft's been in gaming PC, publishing PC games for quite some time. Amazon, they have, oh God, what's the name of their, I forget the,
their service is called Luna, and then they own, I think, a small number of development studios. I can't remember what the number is now. It may just be down to the 1. It may be some small number of like 3 to 6.
Yeah. Nintendo is not interested in competing in that, high-end console space. They certainly don't have the cloud infrastructure backbone to do what Microsoft's doing, or any of the big tech.
But if they did, shut down everybody.
They probably would. But and again, so that's why we're questioning some of these things, or having these conversations, because I think what I'm seeing, at least, is that there is a lot of hand waving. There's a lot of, this is great for the industry, this is great for consumers. I'm not so sure. I'm a bit skeptical on whether or not this is good for industry, it's good for consumers, because I do think that this could lead to mass consolidation of the gaming industry. And we've seen the impact of those things in other industries. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Stream IQ asks, so the argument is not about consolidation. It's actually a dig at Microsoft for the Stream IQ over the course of the 18 months or so that we've been covering this. I'll speak for myself, but I think this extends to everyone. The stance that this deal is something that requires extensive due diligence and intense scrutiny is not solely about consolidation. It's not solely about the potential impact of this consolidation being a gateway to mass consolidation of the industry. That is one of the factors. And then we've listed several other that are a potential impact on the competitive nature of the industry.
Yeah. Biscuit says you're arguing that consolidation is bad and bringing.
That's not the argument. So yeah. I'm going to say it one more time, because I've said it on the show several times. Absolutely zero problem with the acquisitions that have happened to date. Microsoft buying Bethesda, no problems with that. Sony acquiring Bungie, no problems with that. The problem, once again, is the problem with a multi-trillion-dollar company buying another one of the top 10 publishers who earns 65% of the revenue in the gaming industry, combining that into 16.3 plus $7.5 billion of revenue, which at that point will make Microsoft and Sony two of the publishers of the gaming industry that earn around 50% of the revenue. That is the problem. Those are the metrics that define the problem. Unless you have a math-based, metrically based, quantifiable argument to make, everything else that we're going back and forth about is ambiguous and subjective and based on personal value system. And I'm not personally interested in it.
Well said, Logic. I don't disagree with you. I do want to move on to the topic from Consolidation Gaming. Should we be worried? One of the things that I've seen, one of the more recent narratives that I've seen has come up. Actually, I think this was it today? I think it was today. It was hold on a second.
The leak.
What is it? Go ahead, Logic. I didn't hear you, broke up there.
Shoot, sorry. Was this the leak of the 272-page PDF document from the 90s from Sega?
Yeah, it was. A 272-page PDF of classified Sega of America docs from 1996 was just posted online. So this is something that was, this is today. I'm gonna read the IGN article by Ryan Dinsdale here, who says, freshly uncovered Sega document from 1996 that was revealed the company's unbridled confidence ahead of the Saturn's launch in the United States, saying the console was killing Sony in Japan. Actually, the Saturn was, and I don't, B, you may remember this, B, I think you go back as far as we do in terms of gaming. You may remember that the Saturn at one point actually was outselling the PlayStation in Japan. Let's see here. So, as reported by PC Gamer, the previously confidential document was uploaded to Sega Retro and revealed 272 pages of insider information, including manufacturing costs, sales figures, product strategies, and more. An email from Sega America's former CEO, Tom Kalinske, had particularly bold claims about the Sega Saturn's success, highlighting a tweet from Mega Drive Shock below. There's you'd have to, if you want to see it, you can go follow at Mega Drive Shock on Twitter, or just do the search. You'll see the tweet there. The email was sent on March 28th, 1996, 2 months before the Saturn infamously surprise launch in the U.S. We'll talk about that a little bit. It's the one thing, in quotes, it's one thing to hear or read about how well we're doing in Japan versus Sony. It's another to personally witness it, Kalinske said. We are killing Sony. In every store, Saturn hardware is sold out, and there are stacks of PlayStations. The retailers commented they can't compare the true sales rate because Saturn sells out before they can measure accurately. He closed by saying, I wish I would get off I wish I could get all our staff, salespeople, retailers, analysts, media, etc. to see and understand what's happening in Japan. They would then understand why we will win here in the U.S. eventually. How do we show that at E3? There's also some things here that people were cherry picking, Logic. And B, did you see any of this dialogue on Twitter? I don't know if you saw this going around today. That it was in fact Sony's doing, why Sony's own doing, or Sony is why Sega is now out of the console space. Did you see that today?
I mean, people have been saying that for a while now, but people fail to remember that Sony went to Sega and they wanted to put a console together, and Sega denied them. Guess what? Sega got out of console business because they didn't know what the hell they were doing, and Sony's been rocking for a very long time now. So the reason that Sega is out of business is their own fault, because they're idiots. So that's the reason why they went third party. They couldn't sustain having their own console because they released too many consoles and they couldn't focus. By the time they got their head on straight with the Dreamcast, it was too late. People didn't care anymore.
Yeah, the damage was
their own
done.
fault. Yeah, it was their own fault. It had nothing to do with Sony. Sony tried to put a console together with them. They vehemently denied them, and now they're a third party. For sure.
Yeah, and one of the things somebody actually cherry picked a page out of the 277 PDF document that talks about. I'm trying to look for this right now. Logic.
Hey, sorry, Brappo. This is one of the times I'm going to interrupt you. So I just dropped in the chat, Riskit. Gaming industry revenue last year was, what did I put in the chat? $92.3 billion. The combined revenues of Sony, Activision, and Sega are $51.2 billion. Is there some dimension in which that math does not equate to greater than 50%?
So yeah, Logic, I think you had tweeted this. I'm trying to find the tweet now. I had the tweet up and now I can't find it. Hold on a sec here. I'm going to find that. It's because somebody was cherry picking using a. Hold on a sec here. Did you quote tweet that tweet, Logic?
Which one is that? Sorry, Brad.
The one that was that I forget who was. They were cherry picking kind of that one piece.
Yeah. So the problem with the narrative that went around about this was that somebody had picked up on someone else who had posted one page, page 132 out of the PDF document. Risk it. Are you not even listening? What I said was the entire gaming industry in PC and console last year made $92.3 billion. And then what I said is that if the acquisition is allowed to go through, the combined revenue earning of Sony, Microsoft, and ABK will be greater than 50% of the PC and console gaming revenue. Is there any part of that you didn't understand?
He's not paying attention.
What?
All right, Logic. So go ahead. So something was kind of cherry picked out of this document.
Yeah, and sorry, I'll go back to this. And one other thing else, because this is running rampant in the chat. The decision-making rubric for mergers and acquisitions is not solely antitrust. It is antitrust and anti-competition. And that's why you have to pay attention to not the monopoly argument typically goes away amazingly quickly. There is no threat of monopoly from this merger. People who were PlayStation fans who were running around saying that that Microsoft would have a monopoly, I told them that they were incorrect as well. Monopoly has been off the table for 18 months. It was dead as soon as the deal was brought up. This has all been a matter of whether or not it fits within antitrust guidelines. So the person who ran around about this said, picked one page out of the PDF document, picked one bullet out of the summarized 6 bullets on that page, and talked about that, basically the narrative was Sony outspent Sega out of the industry, and now they're getting their comeuppance. So one of the problems, there are lots of problems with that, but the major problem with that is that was in a segment of the report that was a brand review led by the vice president of marketing at the time for Sega of America. That point of equity was talking about brand equity. And it was a reference to the fact that Sony had leveraged its brand equity as a no-name in consumer electronics to outcompete Sega in the console space. There were lots of things.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt real quick, but I found the tweet. This person's trying to position as the timing of this document could be more relevant. It's really not relevant, and I guess the thing that kind of frustrates me is that people who claim to be fans of video games, or the gaming industry, a lot of them don't have no historical context or understanding of what's happened previously in the gaming industry. And so this person takes this snapshot of Sega of America, Saturn versus PlayStation. How did Sony do it? And they take these bullet points, but they provide no additional historical context, which is really important here, which is actually one of the things that frustrates me on Twitter, that people just say things without providing additional context and just run with it instead of doing their due diligence. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to read these bullet points. Sony is generally perceived to be cheaper. That has improved, but we still suffer from an early damage. There's some context here for that first bullet point. Sega shot themselves in the foot at E3 1995 when they came out before Sony did and announced the price of the PlayStation here in the US. Sega came out, did a stealth launch. Sega came out at E3, said $399 for the Sega Saturn, did a stealth launch with their retail partners. I think this is what you spoke to earlier, B, about them not really handling the launch of their consoles well and pissing off some of their retail partners, because that happened. They said $399. Sony now, seeing the release or seeing that Sony or that Sega came out and it was going to sell this Saturn at $399. Came out, and there's a YouTube video of it. You can see it. This is probably PlayStation's first mic drop moment at E3 1995, or at an E3 event. Just came out and literally said $299 and walked off stage. And that was it. So at that point, you had a $100 price difference. Also, the Sega Saturn was more difficult to develop for at the time than the Sony PlayStation. One of the things that Sega of America also mentioned is that Sony's product software looks better than ours. This is driven by our lack of delivering a product that appears to consumers to be better in advertising that focus on this dimension. Again, Sega's admitting here that this is self-inflicted, that they haven't done a good job at doing this. PlayStations are better merchandised than Saturn, resulting in more exposure and sampling. Sega equity has been damaged by the 32X and Sega CD. This goes back to what B just said earlier. Okay? These things are self-inflicted by Sega themselves. Since PlayStation is newer, some consumers feel that is technically superior. Sony has effectively leveraged their considerable equity for consumer electronics. So, I mean, what I don't like is how this thing is being spun to what's happening today. As relates, and I know people are spinning it as relates to what's going on with this merger and acquisition of ABK and Xbox and so forth. But the point is that there's a lot of historical context that people aren't pulling on here and going back to understand how Sega got into the position it was, and they're just taking these bullet points and just running it with it like it's Hulkamania. Sorry, Lajay. It was long-winded. I know I interrupt you, but go ahead, man.
No, that's good. And then I posted, right, the two PDF pages that came after that, right, that talked about all the things that Sega needed to do, which they failed to do. It ignored the dozens and dozens of pages that there were from the CEO of Sega from 1990 to 1996, who talked about all the things that they needed to do to better position the Saturn, all of which were ignored or not taken up by Sega of Japan, by HQ. It just ignored like tons of data and tons of reality. There was an attempt to try to equate the scale of what was going on. I may have. Yeah, sorry, I went talking about another thread. So yeah. There was just an effort to equate this to what Microsoft is doing now, and it just doesn't equate. My point on this was, yes, did Sony leverage their brand equity? Yes, they did. Microsoft also leveraged its brand equity to get into the console gaming space in the first place. In 2001, one of the key components of why people were looking forward to the Xbox is Microsoft were the people who basically made gaming on Windows feasible.
On Windows, yeah.
They're one of the leaders in the industry that helps people agree on standards for APIs and abstraction layers and yada yada yada. Xbox uses those APIs and abstraction layers as well. They run on DirectX on Xbox. That was one of the things that people look forward to as kind of a commonality of technology that would hopefully lead to efficiencies and better games. I mean, the thing that Sony didn't do is I say Sony? Sony. The thing that Sony didn't do is Sony didn't, at least at volume, at least at any reportable volume, is they didn't bundle TVs and Walkmans and music CDs with the PlayStation and sell them at a loss in order to gain a foothold in the gaming industry, right? You can utilize brand equity. And again, like I've talked about, right, with this topic of consolidation, there's no problem with going around and making third-party exclusives. There's no problem with making third-party exclusive deals. There's no problem with competing in all of the ways in which the industry has tracked and allowed, right, allowable activities within the industry. The problem that Microsoft is running into now is they've butt up against this trend and regime where there are things being called into question about anti-competition and sizes of acquisitions, and that's all there is to it, right? And that stuff is in the hands of two regulatory agencies now, right? And applicable judicial systems, and they've got to make those decisions and make those weighings. But the problem I think that we've run into on this show is, I think what people always try and do is they always try and get away with proving the null hypothesis, right? They don't actually try to prove their point. They try to disprove yours, and that's not an effective argument, and it's not really one that I buy. If I present you a mathematically based case and you say you don't agree with it, particularly when you haven't pulled the data yourself, as has been the case today, then that's just not an agreement that's not an argument that I'm really paying any attention to, because it's not math-based, it's not proven. We seem to have forgotten what the scientific method is in this country, as you often say, BRAP.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's evident by the whole COVID vaccine thing, but I'm not going to get into that conversation because, look, like Josh, math is math. I mean, like people like, who is it? You were having a conversation with a guy who's now responding to me. I'll call him out by name. He's been on the show, JD Gamer. He says he responded to me. He's like that he's literally having the biggest laugh in his life. He's like, if you think I need a BRAP to explain economics to me, I have a bridge to Saboon to sell you. You dudes are hilarious. Again, this is part of the issue with the conversation. You, in fact, actually provided him some numbers, which he got wrong. He was trying to equate ABK to Roblox and say Roblox generates more revenue than ABK. That's actually not true. And you provided him those stats. And, he's just grossly misinformed. And this is the problem. A lot of people tend to go to these shows, these podcasts, or hang out with certain people, and they don't. And this is where they get their information from. They don't do the math. They don't. God, it's amazing with amount of information that's available on the internet for people to research these things or to have a basic understanding of basic economics. No one does that. And when you call them out, all you get is an LOL. And people telling you, of course I understand economics, but they haven't provided they haven't provided a response that speaks to that. So Stream IQ
in the chat says the issue is the lack of typing the mathematics of tangible outcomes everyone can understand. And Stream IQ, if that's what you're building your basis of assessment on, then that's just your value system, and I'll acquiesce that to you. My point that I've been trying to convey to people is the FTC and commerce regulation in this country is not solely tied to tangible outcomes. The FTC is by definition a risk management and risk mitigation agency. They're responsible, their mandate that they're charged with is assessing potential impact and potential outcomes, estimating the likelihood and impact of those things, and then making their recommendations and decisions based on that. I think some people have tried to go down the path, this is why I talk about trying to disprove something based on the null hypothesis. People have tried to go down the path and say, well, you don't know that that's going to happen. You're exactly right. But because the agency doesn't know what's guaranteed to happen, they have to make an assessment on either what's likely to happen, or how impactful it will be if it should occur. And that's one of the things that drives their decision making. When the impact from something is potentially severe, that may drive them to not weigh the likelihood as heavily. Maybe. But that's a decision that agency has to make.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point, Logic.
Again, one of the things that should be recognized, right, whether you agree that it's right or not, right, people should recognize that within this country, within the political regime, within the FTC, around the world, right? There is, you can call it, regulation remorse, right? Or merger acquisition debt, right? But around the world, lots of questions are being asked as to why the world, but probably also America in general, right, didn't do more due diligence about WhatsApp, didn't do more due diligence about Instagram. In Microsoft's case, didn't do maybe as much due diligence around LinkedIn. Again, I think we talked about it last week, right? We saw in the UK, Facebook's Meta's acquisition of Giphy rolled back, right? And how difficult it is to put those genies back in the bottle, right, when bad things have happened. We look at a lot of the vertical mergers that we talked about, again, on this show, of ISPs and telecoms and major media conglomerates. And the fact that, again, the negative impacts of those on consumers have been realized today. But it's too late to put those genies back in the bottle.
Yeah, and that's kind of been my point. I mean, that's kind of been my point with, this could potentially open the bag to other things happening. And once you open that bag, it's hard to close it. It's not easy. Again, we have historical precedent of that happening in other industries. So, anyhow, but the Sega thing, yeah, I just, it's this narrative that's been going out there for some time, going around for some time, that it was Sony that put Sega out of the console space, and though it's not true. Again, I think the part that frustrates me again is that people claim to be fans of the video game industry, but actually don't understand the history of video games. So, any other thoughts on Sega? I thought you did a good job of pretty much summarizing how they shot themselves in the foot, but any other thoughts, man?
No. I mean, Sega's, sort of bounced back in the last few years with, a lot of the titles and stuff that they have released, and, they found a niche with purchasing Atlas and, taking on the Persona games and things like that. But as far as, what people are talking about in regards to, how they got into the console business, like I said before, they did that to themselves. They released too many consoles too quickly, and like I said, once it came to the Dreamcast, it was too little, too late. I thought they had something with the Dreamcast, and I think if they would have, kind of waited with some of the previous consoles and released that one, they probably would have stuck around for a little longer. But they did it to themselves, and unfortunately, someone's always trying to point the finger and blame someone else for reasons of why they've had failures, but that was solely Sega's mishap, and they just didn't handle the business correctly.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I mean, there is that story where at some point Sega of America, I think and I got to go back and read this story, but there's a story out there where Sega of America did just some kind of marketing analysis of the brand perception of Sega at the time, and it wasn't good. It wasn't it really wasn't favorable towards Sega, and it was kind of it was something that Sega of America shared with Sega Japan, and Sega Japan pretty much laughed them out of the room. And that was kind of that was something that was when I forget, it was the CEO of Sega at the time, Sega of America, said it was one of the things that was frustrating because they weren't willing to acknowledge that the perception of Sega had declined in North America. So, and they thought that that they would. And this is, I got to go back and look at the story. I want to say this may have been right before the release of the Sega Saturn. But anyhow. Logic, any other thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, Stream IQ is asking about the regulating agency should do their due diligence, but the conversation that is being questioned is about the troubles of this particular deal. Can we describe at least one specific historical? So I just posted in the chat an article linking to mergers that have not been good for consumers. Another two that I always point to is cell phone companies, right? And some of the mergers and acquisitions that have gone on. Your cell phone bill, your cell phone bill for services has actually been going down, but by a very incredibly small percentage. But the way that the cell phone companies are extracting more money from you now is in the way that they're subsidizing phones. And when you go back and you look at your historical bill overall, you will see that you were paying in general more for cell phone service now than you were before. Another one that I always point to and that people often talk about is the record label industry, right? We often point to innovation, right, is represented, right, and further distribution of revenue is represented by the rise of the streaming music companies. But when you go back and pull the thread and do some deeper research, you actually find out that those streaming companies are actually paying a lot of that licensing revenue to the major record labels, which we allowed to consolidate in this country down to the point now where there are only 3 major record labels that make a disproportionate amount of the revenue across the entire industry. Again, leading to
artists can't make money. Artists don't even make money off like their content really anymore.
Yeah. So again, this is not me. I'm sorry.
Selling the rights to their music because they aren't even. That's why all of them are selling the rights to their music. Yeah. Because they aren't even making the money off of the streams. No, unless you're on tour, hitting street dates and things like that, where people are buying merch and buying your tickets, things like that. They aren't making money off of streaming their music on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, all those places. So that's why you see a lot of artists now are actually selling their catalogs. They're selling the rights to their music so they can actually recoup some money back, because they're not making what they were making when physical media was there.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. I remember Snoop Dogg actually recently famously called out the way the music industry is set up. He's like, it doesn't make sense. Right. He talked about like in his day, like if he sold 3 million records, like he got that money.
Right. Yeah. So all of this is not to say, right, that anybody who thinks like the opposite way is just out and out wrong, right? My point when I say all this stuff is to say that there's room for the conversation. There's room for people to have different perspectives, right? What I don't do is when I bring these things up to you guys in the chat, to people on Twitter, what I don't say is I'm right, you're wrong, LOL, what are you talking about? Get out of here with that. That's the behavior of somebody who, in my opinion, is having a very immature conversation about the topic, and that's kind of a waste of my time, and I just don't need to be bothered. That's not to say that their conversation that they're trying to have is absolutely of no value. It's just not the conversation I'm trying to have. And so there's no real need for us to attempt to exchange ideas, because they're presenting to me that they're not actually open to the exchange of ideas. And that's my primary problem with this has been people who are very convicted in their assertions, particularly when they can't prove or back those assertions up by tangible, quantifiable metrics. Again, and my personal feeling is if you love Xbox, before I say that, let me just, one thing I forgot to mention, BRAP, is, you talked about, right, in this conversation, a lot of people have tried to equate scale to what's going on in the market, and this was the point, right, when this person threw Roblox at me, right, or even back to the Sony Sega thing, right, the market cap of Sega at the time was 2.5 billion, went as high as 5 billion. Sony's market cap was $9 billion at the time, right? So the difference in scale wasn't that much between them. What we're talking about now is, particularly when people bring up this Microsoft versus Sony aspect and why it's okay for Microsoft to make the acquisition. Again, Microsoft is a $2.5 trillion company. Sony is a $115 billion company. It's just a radically different in scale and radically different in its total overall impact to the market. So again, if you love Xbox, you should feel confident and satisfied in loving Xbox. If that means that you feel the need to defend them every single time, regardless of math, metrics, policy, impact, things that are of concern to other consumers besides yourself, then that's fine. I'm just not a proponent of the justification and rationalization and excusism of that, right in the face of actually outstanding facts that prove and say otherwise.
Yep. All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to wrap up the show. Unless you have something else you want to chime in.
No, I'm good, man.
Yeah, but that's interesting about the
a lot of
music
games to play. Yeah,
there are a lot of games to play.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah, I just wrapped up Final Fantasy 16.
you just finished it?
Yeah, I just finished it. Yeah, I discussed Final Fantasy 16 when we started the show.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I gotta let it marinate a little bit more. It's a good game. But like I said to Logic at the start of the show, I'm not sure if it's what I would put it up there as a Game of Year the contender. I think Tears of the Kingdom, from what I played so far, is still up there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I want to give a big shout out there with the live chat. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this early evening. Appreciate it. We typically don't go live at this time. We typically do go live every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you, everyone. And please do me a favor, smash that like button if you're new. Subscribe to the show. Hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. B, hey, great seeing you, B. Thank you for joining us. I know it's kind of like the 11th hour when I said in the BRAP DM that I was going to do a show at like 5. So I appreciate you coming through, man.
Man, you know, I join whenever I can. I saw the message in there, so I figured I hop in there and try to give my 2 cents. You know, great conversation. Glad to be a part of it, and you know, we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, definitely. And Logic, thank you again, man. Again, 11th hour. Appreciate you coming through as well, man.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and no BRAP rant this weekend. I'll be out of town, but we'll be back next Wednesday at 9. Well, actually, there may not be a BRAP next Wednesday, depending on what time I get home, because I'll be returning home from out of town. Actually, B, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods, B. So we have to link up, man. But yeah, there may or may not be a BRAP. I think it just depends on when I get back home from my trip on Wednesday. So, but I'll keep everyone up to speed on my Twitter account. You can follow me on Twitter, BRAP_podcast. So thank you, everyone. Hey, enjoy the rest of the week. And like B Money said, lots of video games to play. There's a lot of really good content out right now. So enjoy the content, and we'll catch you next week.